There is such new things that are happening on several different fronts. But the thing is, how are you going to navigate through all of this? It's like actually applying new technology to help you do your job better. And I got to say, Lalo, I'm excited about today because this company that we've been watching this for a while. It's been great. There's a lot of growth and whatnot, but we're going to be able to get into how to actually utilize this company's technology to navigate. And of course, there's other companies out there too, but the point being is to apply AI technology to help you actually navigate through trade in a much more compliant and streamlined fashion. So I'm loving this one.
Yeah, I know. I'm really excited to have our next guest, Evan Smith, back on our show. He was on previously, and I was prior to hitting record. We were. It's kind of funny, but prior to hitting record, we told him that a lot has changed. So, just as a little bit of a recap, when we last talked with Evan, we were talking about value chains and AI, and like where was trade heading and all that, and believe it or not, it's almost been 2 years, Evan. So it was June of 2024. And I told him Trump was not even in office. So obviously, aside from the fact that AI evolves like, I'm going to say weekly, so daily, it just evolves so fast that aside from that fact, I mean, it's almost been 2 years. I mean, it's like night and day now. But also trade has also evolved dramatically. So we're so happy to have you back on the show, just to kind of see where we left off and what's happened since then. So thank you and welcome back to our show, Evan.
Thanks for having me. Can't believe it's been 2 years.
Time flies too. I bet you have barely caught your breath on certain things, haven't you?
You have no idea.
Well, the good news is we have seen so much growth. I mean, so many announcements, so many different partnerships, so many different, like the evolution of your product itself. Most recently, not too recent, I guess I would say in the last 8-9 months, we did see like your announcements on the product and then the partnerships with the government. And I heard you on an interview with Forbes say that you're not only B2B, you're also B2G, B2 government. And so, that's a big step forward also with that. So,
well, let me throw this out as we're getting into it to our listeners to kind of set the stage when we get into this, because Lalo mentioned, Evan, we're going to want to hear more about the product passport. I've looked at it and did some reading on it, and this is really cool. But it changes things. But to our listeners, what happens when customs knows your supply chain? Sometimes they know your supply chain better than you do. There's really a structural shift in the way government is enforcing trade. Would you agree with that, Evan?
Yeah. So from a regulatory standpoint, I think it began with the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, and now it's just a snowball of network-shaped regulation. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is that the border agencies are being tasked with the job of enforcing across these extended global value chain networks. And the fancy kind of academic or legal term for that is extraterritorial regulation. So any government has the right to say what happens within their own borders, but now what's happening is the governments are saying these things outside of our borders are, restricted or permitted or what have you, or carbon tax, in the case of the EU carbon border adjustment. And we're going to enforce that as goods approach or leave our borders. So that's the new paradigm is the governments are looking at these vast global supply chain networks. And the private sector is being asked to keep up, and we're trying to solve both sides of that equation.
Well, and in the model, traditionally, an importer has their own data, and they're looking at what they're producing, if you will, and not necessarily even extending out to the raw goods, or
Yep.
the origin manufacturing. However, that Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, it's anti-slavery basically, or anti-forced labor. It has forced people to go beyond and say, from my supplier, I've got to have more information. They can only do so much. And your systems, instead of the traditional, let me look at my data and be very protective of it and whatnot, you're taking a whole different model here and expanding and using multiple sources. I mean, your company is helping customs evaluate, where the risks are as far as what entries and things of that nature and whatever else they're doing. To that same extent, your product passport is basically a start to finish history, if you will, of that product, right?
If you think about it from the standpoint of how does an importer tell the government about its product today? Everyone, I think all of your listeners are pretty deep in trade compliance. So, you've got the item level at a customs entry, and you've got an HS code. And as the stacking tariffs and all these exclusions and like the PGA requirements get kind of layered onto the customs process or the customs compliance attestation, you get all these 99s and it's sort of the least bad way within the current paradigm to make a richer disclosure about the nature of the goods. And our point of view is that that's basically failing. With the 232s, with the 301s are coming out with all the stacking logic, exclusions, the actual data model of a customs entry is ill-suited to the shape of the modern regulatory environment. And these regulations are requiring, a deep understanding of the product and the value chain networks behind the product. Where did the raw materials come from? In what proportions? Is it Chinese steel? Is it Russian steel? What's the country of smelt versus the country of pour? Right? And as you get into the PGAs and the CPSC coming out with their new regulations in July. So the trade is being asked to make these much deeper disclosures and to be on the hook for so much more about the nature of their goods, that they require a new trade process to make that kind of an attestation. Now, on the other side of the fence, you've got the government saying, I'm now tasked with understanding these vast global value chain networks and enforcing against, forced labor, or calculating the EU carbon border adjustment, or figuring out the country of origin, the USMCA qualifications, and all the stacking logic on these duties with all this new complexity. And so they're struggling too. Like they need to understand this really rich, deep picture on all of the items crossing the border. So both sides have been struggling, and what we've been doing at Altana is we've been building on top of this data foundation that we've built over the last 8 years, which is mapping out that bottoms-up view of the supply chain network. And we've been helping CBP and other government agencies to understand and enforce those network-shaped problems. At the same time, we've been helping the biggest importers in the world and the biggest logistics providers and forwarders and brokers in the world to comply. And the advent of the product passport was about 2 years ago. We said, there's got to be a better way. You've got these companies that are doing their homework. They believe in the mission. They understand these regulations, and they are still experiencing detentions, and they're still experiencing all this ambiguity around country of origin and USMCA qualification and what duties they do or do not owe. And can we create a two-way street where they can say, these are my goods. This is the digital identity of my goods. Here's a view into the value chain networks behind them. And here's everything AI can tell us about risk, about duties, about HS codes. and then create a much more constructive interaction pattern pre-arrival. So the guinea pig on the product passport was one of the world's most trusted retailers. I won't share their name here, but a company that had experienced 47 detentions in a row of the same goods from the same supplier overseas, and every time they would experience a detention, they would gather the documentation, they would engage their broker, engage their lawyers. It was 3-4 months to resolution, and then every single time the goods were ultimately released. And they added up that cost, and it was roughly $150 million of fees and business interruptions. Mm-hmm. So they were guinea pig. Like, we've got nothing to lose here. It can't get any worse than this. And on their 48th shipment of these goods, they created the product passport in advance of the shipment. It was all pre-vetted. CBP was obviously working closely with us through this. And now they're doing product passports for their entire catalog. So can I just kind of whitelist the entire catalog and have that trade facilitation, trade assurance benefit before the goods are even shipped? And in this case now, they're doing it before the goods are getting made.
Well, and to that point, when you're saying the product passport, folks, what that's doing is taking who your supplier is, what your product is, where it's manufactured, where it's assembled, where all the little details with it, and putting it together basically in a comprehensive story of that product.
Exactly.
Which, putting yourself in customs shoes, they're getting hit with so many entries of so many commodities that are just, you could be looking at coffee cups, and the next thing is a, automobile, and the next thing is men's shirts. And then, it's just chemicals and different, they're just getting hit with everything. And this really helps in where somebody can look at that, and you're basically, from what I'm gathering here, your product passport tells the story of a product. And if there's any questions, then they can be, and it's done in advance of arrival. So that enables, if there's a question or something that customs asks, enables the importer to be able to say, well, here, let me add something to it. And as you're doing that, your system is such, it's a continual update for that product, right?
You said it beautifully. That's all right. and then the AI is helping the importer to target a potential risk that they might want to go document and explain, and hey, this factory does have this connection to this risky thing, but here's the purchase orders, commercial invoices, and packing lists that substantiate that our production pathway is good to go. We have an AI that does non-pref country of origin analysis. We have AI that screens for the HTS classifications or computes them where they're missing. We have AI that does all the USMCA qualification work, including like evidentiary standards behind it and audit readiness. And then we do duty calculations, inclusive of all the 232s and 301s and exclusions. So you've got this intelligent system to understand the nature of the goods and to make a disclosure to the government. And the work we've been doing with CBP, who's one of our longstanding customers and partners, is to really try to make that a non-adversarial dynamic. Right. So why share more with the government than you have to? And the answer is you've got to create some carrots and not just sticks. So what are the trade facilitation benefits, and then how do we get to this kind of constructive interaction where pre-arrival, pre-shipment, or even pre-manufacturing, you're able to vet and get assurance that these things are good to go, and that's the path we're on. So it's been, I think we did the first product passport January of 2025, and we've been scaling this up with some of the biggest auto manufacturers, electronics companies, apparel businesses, and then their forwarders and brokers.
I bet you're streamlining things, but here's the thing, that to make all of that come together, this is where so many people think that the use of AI technology is going to replace people in their roles. There's a lot of work that is needed, but it's done instead of being reactionary, you're being proactive.
Right.
And that is you're the company in the end, instead of being reactive, like you said, $150 million in disruption of in the cost in all those delays, that would pay for a lot of salaries and a lot of technology and a lot of things on the front end. And so instead of being, as I would say, being that proverbial pooper scooper at the end of a parade, you're actually feeding the beast on the front end and streamlining that process, right?
Yeah.
So I'll go ahead.
I was just going to say that the trade compliance professional job has gotten infinitely more complex over the last 5 years. We're being asked to do so much more. And what this does is give them the power tools to actually do that job. You need to know the value chain network. You need to be able to parse all these documents and reconcile them and make sense of them and bundle them up into a regulatory attestation. You got to navigate all the changing, the daily changing tariff complexity. So this gives the trade compliance professional the underlying toolkit, and then by creating that direct bridge into the government, it creates a trade compliance, trade enforcement, trade facilitation flywheel where, instead of cat and mouse and I'm not going to use your pooper scooper, but
I guess I'm one of the few that can pull that off. But
you got the accent for it.
Yeah.
But it creates that proactive and constructive dynamic as opposed to the reactive. You're cleaning up a mess that you didn't even know existed in the first place.
Yeah,
correct. And Evan, you talked about like the retailer that became more efficient, and we were talking about all this visibility, everything. Where I guess it used to be back in the CT-PAT days. Let's go back that far. The 9/11 and why CT-PAT even came about. But used to be that visibility was kind of a nice thing to have. Because you needed to know your supply chain, that kind of stuff. So those were the roots of maybe of what has evolved to what you're doing now. But it sounds to me like because of everything that you're talking about, how it's evolving and how you are talking about the product passports. I mean, it's and even how CBP is using your tool. It almost sounds like visibility is not an option anymore. You do need to have it. Thus the product passport. Do you feel or do you see like this is? I guess what I'm trying to get at is it's pretty much in its infancy. Let's call it. Not everybody's doing this. Do you feel like this is going to be the norm in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, or? I mean, it seems to me like it might be, but I mean, I just want to pick your brain on that and see how you feel about that.
Well, I don't know if it's going to become universally mandatory, but what I will say, I'll say a couple things. Some of our customers are starting to use this as their method of responding to a CF-28. So a request for additional supply chain information.
So it's still reactionary, but they're utilizing this in a way to maybe bridge into doing it more advanced.
So one
That's
is
a
proactive.
great idea.
Okay, I can share this proactively and avoid the CF-28 or avoid the detention.
Right.
Some of them are using it as the means to respond to the CF-28, and then where this might go from a much more sort of integrated part of the trade process is anytime there's an audit or a need to look deep into the supply chain, this could be kind of at the core of that. there's this trade facilitation kind of pre-clearance, pre-validation use case that we spoke to a minute ago. So the way I position that is it's like a global entry for goods. So you can still go through the slow lane, or you can voluntarily opt into this system that exposes more of your data to the government in exchange for that's speed and convenience benefit. And both, when you go through the airport, both exist side by side.
Yeah.
So I think that's already true, and I think the next step is how do we get this kind of supply chain disclosure more baked into the trade enforcement and kind of trade audit process. And then the other thing that I would just say directionally is we're just going to see more and more and more of these laws that are focused on the commodities themselves and the value chain networks behind them. And I do think that the customs entry is the wrong way to actually collect that information and build a trade clearance process around products and their value chains. It doesn't do the job. So whether it's an Altana passport or something else, who knows? But I think the customs entry is going to be a relic.
Well, it's a transaction right now, and this is looking at more of the supply chain rather than the one-off. Every time you're looking at the individual transactions, I know that customs has been wanting to, and it's been a cultural change for the last 10, 15 years. I was fortunate enough to be part of and it was a great group of people on the entry simplification working group. And the very things you're talking about, we were talking about in that working group, and customs was expressing what happens if you were to share, your suppliers, your supply chain, you're this, you're that. And, a lot of people say, oh, no, wait a minute, we can't do that, and it's a risk. And, well, yeah, but if you're on the up and up and you're trying to do everything, it's a advanced preliminary thing where somebody can take the time and go, you may not be aware of this. Your supplier,
yep,
there's a risk there with somebody that they're getting sanctioned or flagged or whatever. Oh, wow, I didn't know that. Well, you got to share your information. So I think this is fantastic, Evan, that you are actually making reality out of some dreams in the past, I guess, on this.
Yeah, the thing I would say is, you've got both sides, the regulator, the enforcement agency, and the trade struggling with the same fundamental challenge, right? Like the world has changed. It's tariffs, it's economic security, it's forced labor, it's carbon. I know that this is a mostly U.S. audience, I assume, but the EU just came out with their Central Customs Authority, and they're standing that up. So they're going to create a unified border and a unified customs process. And at the heart of that, we just had our summit 2 weeks ago in D.C., and we had we had Philippe Dupontet come over and give the European perspective on trade policy. And what he told everybody at the summit was that the direction of travel in EU customs is that they are going to require full value chain traceability for all of the goods entering their market. So this is the direction of travel. Like governments are saying, we need to understand the full value chain, and we're going to require that enforcement and compliance at the border.
And it's continuously or continuing monitoring, continuous monitoring, I guess is the best way to say it.
Right.
And it's because your supply chain is almost a living entity. Hey, somebody's run out of something. We got to use somebody else. We got to do. So all these different people, these products, these raw goods, this is going on. The world right now, the situation with the ocean traffic and all, well, I got to change carriers because they use this route and it's blocked and I need to use this one. That's the thing that's so phenomenal is that looking at it rather than transactional, you're looking at it more strategic from a compliance perspective to, I guess, look at it also enhance a compliance. Your product here helps enhance a company's leadership and their strategy for the company as you're navigating the winds of trade. I guess is like, that's getting kind of corny, but I hate to say it, but it's like it's a good analogy. I guess I gotta say.
Yeah, no way. One thing, you know, we always talk to our trade compliance professional users, and you know, we built a great community in Altana. Amy Morgan and Alan Burson, you know, over the years, and have done just incredible work to build this great community and network of folks in the trade compliance space. And one of the things we always talk about is, you know, 15, 20 years ago, this was like a back office function where, you know, all the strategic decision making was happening in design and sourcing and marketing and sales and procurement. And then, you know, you basically in the trade compliance space, you basically just get handed some documents if you were lucky. You know, go figure out how to get these across the border, and you know, no detentions, no penalties. And so it, you know, it was always sort of like last minute, reactive, and you know, never part of that like strategic decision making. To your point, what's happening now because of how the world has changed is that trade is just baked into every decision, or it should be baked into every decision, right? So like, what products do we design? How should those value chains be configured from a landed cost standpoint, from a supply chain resilience standpoint, from a geopolitical risk standpoint? How does that bake into our sourcing decisions and our supplier discovery? Okay, then how do we, you know, maintain those procurement relationships in a way that is responsive to a very tumultuous trade policy environment? You know, if we need to switch something here, or, you know, dual source or whatever. And then the logistics themselves. You know, these things need to get rerouted, or there's a war. Like, it's just a much more complex world. And so what's so cool is you're seeing the topic of trade and the mandate and role of the trade compliance professional just get baked into the full business process and into the strategic mind share across that full business process.
I will say that it is phenomenal where a compliance person in the past has been probably one of the most cynical groups, because they always say, no, you can't do that. Or as you get a product out there, you want to do what? You can't do that. And they've always being looked at as the no group, because they've been brought in so late in the ball game. And now, like you said, they're brought in, and usually your compliance folks have a pretty good vision holistically of the product and the whole thing, and would actually be a great champion in helping to streamline processes all the way through. Again, from your sourcing or your purchasing and all this to your, you know, final logistics and delivery, final mile delivery and all that, everything in between. Your products and your systems are so phenomenal. The question would be, what seems to be difficult right now? I'm kind of gathering that your technology is fantastic and will only get better. And Lalo knows this better than I do. I mean, I love listening to him when he starts talking about the systems and stuff. Starts going over my head quicker than 2 shakes of a dog's leg. But as we're looking at technology, and it's great, right? It sounds like probably the most difficult part is somebody accepting this and being willing to change. And how do you work through that?
Yeah, there's real business transformation for everybody involved to really get the most out of what we're doing and where we're taking the platform. So, you know, within an importer, how do we get comfortable tracing our multi-tier supply chain and engaging beyond the direct suppliers to gather necessary data and documentation? Like that, somebody's got to make those decisions. And historically, it's been uncomfortable to talk to your supplier's supplier. Now, we provide a lot of that visibility, but to make a real trade attestation, you need to augment that with traceability. And so our product passports not only go B2G, from a business to a government, they go from businesses to businesses. So we use product passports to actually do that value chain traceability and data gathering. So that's a big business transformation decision. The decision to voluntarily share more information with the government is a big decision, and there's a lot of change. The comfort with AI is its own thing. I mean, even in the last 3-4 months, I've just seen this radical shift in people's willingness to use and trust these technologies, right? And so that's within an importer. When you look at the forwarders and the brokers, 2 years ago, if you said the word AI to them, you'd get kicked out of the building.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, now the complexity of the job just requires these power tools to help navigate that complexity. And, where we're taking them is, how do we dramatically accelerate the entry writing process and all the compliance determinations using AI and using all this data available to us, so that you can become radically more productive and do higher value added services. So, well, this is now public. So I could talk about this. Last week we signed a MOU with Maersk, and the goal is to roll out Altana product passports across their entire Gemini network by the end of 2027. What's the Gemini network? So this is Maersk's kind of flagship digital trade or trade corridors. They've got 12 ports where they're guaranteeing these kind of premium delivery windows and these this delivery service model. It's kind of like an Amazon Prime or like a Costco membership. You pay a little bit more, but you have the surety of all these logistics timelines and all the kind of drayage and terminal setup and everything's just kind of fast tracked. The big thing that Maersk can't control within their Gemini network is clearance. Can't control what the government does, and so that's kind of the last piece of having this super highway for global trade as Maersk. And so we just announced together the intent to roll out product passports to all 12 ports and the associated customs authorities in their Gemini network, so that an importer, a shipper on that network, can have pre-validation, effectively pre-clearance across all 12 ports. And these represent 70% of global trade, right? These are the biggest ports in the world. So once you can kind of elevate as a logistics provider, once you can kind of elevate above the day-to-day, I just got to write entries and get through these, purchase orders. Then you can start to imagine higher value-added compliance services for your customers, right? Like that's pretty radical. And then on the government side, you're speaking of change management. I mean, all of the entrenched systems, all the entrenched interests, all the people who have built up a workflow or way of doing things, and so you're kind of trying to help all three parties at the same time realize the art of the possible, and that's a whole lot of shuttle diplomacy that we do between all three parties to try to help them see the vision and iterate toward it.
Great.
All right. So real quick, if I want to start, my company doesn't use a product passport. What should I be doing as a trade person to start going down this road to say, I want to incorporate this concept and I want to incorporate the technology in this? I mean, obviously, I don't want to sit here and go, hey, we want to sell Altana, but if you've got a great product, look at it. It's like, but what do I need to do?
What I would do, whether you do it with us or not, what I would do as a trade compliance professional is I would have a program designed to get a deep understanding of my product's value chains, because that's the foundation for duty calculation in this new environment. It's the foundation for forced labor and carbon and critical minerals and all the other regulations that are coming on those value chains. It's the foundation for USMCA and other free trade programs and all the rules of origin. So for every item in your catalog, you should have a process and a program to understand that, like, who are my suppliers, where are the actual input parts coming from, and then where are the parts coming from at the tier 2 and the tier 3 and tier 4 all the way up to the raw material. So that's kind of table stakes for trade compliance these days. You must have that data foundation, whether you use Altana or not. That we think we've got the best way to do that, but whether you do that with us or not, you should have it. And then step 2 is, once you've done that mapping and once you've done that analysis, you can now, it's only through Altana. That's just a fact, right? So you can create a product passport and you can share those with the government. And we're going to be rolling this out with other governments abroad, right? So we want to be in all the major markets as import destinations. And the goal is to have, customs pre-validation across all your import destinations. So, direct link from your product catalog into the government, and then this constructive understanding of, where there's risk or where there's an issue, about it in advance and you can deal with it.
I'd love that. I've got a strong background with FedEx. Obviously, I was there for over 30 years. And it was what I call the express mode of transportation demanded the express mode of clearance, which is a little different than your conventional, commercial offices and things of that nature. Your model is taking that express mode of clearance and just blowing it up and going just on even further. I love it because you could apply this to obviously any mode of transportation. And the other thing about this is, again, looking at how much effort it will take. There's a lot of work to be done, but instead of being reactionary on the back end, you're doing it on the front end.
Exactly.
Say a comment just real quick to other CEOs or leaders of companies. To what do they need to do from a leadership? They're not going to get into the compliance quagmire, right? All right. What do they need to do to encourage, inspire their staff budget-wise? What do they need to do from a finance perspective, from your perspective, to change and affect change, I guess, as well as utilize this AI technology before their competition does?
I love that question. I would say 3 things. One is, as a CEO of a business operating across borders, you have to reconceive of your business process and your internal organization and your tooling as managing an entire value chain network and not merely selling to customers and buying from suppliers. Like, you exist in that value chain network, you need to know it. And, because of great power competition, because of regulation, because of supply chain resilience, all these big macro forces are making it your job as the CEO to change how your business works and operates across these networks. So that's the first point. Second point is, if it's not already the case, make sure that you elevate the role of trade into a real stakeholder in the strategic direction of the business, and you bake trade into just about every part of the business. Meaning, as you're designing products, as you're engineering products, as you're sourcing, as you're procuring, rather than this kind of like assembly line where the trade team gets all the decisions that have already been made, and you got to figure out how to get it across the border. Bake trade intelligence into the full business process, and that can become a competitive advantage. So it's not only defensive because the world has just got so much more complex, but if you do that, then you now have this competitive advantage. And then the third thing I would say is these teams historically don't have much budget. They're not big users of software. They don't get to buy all the fancy toys, and so just the fluency, the budgets, the familiarity with how to buy software and how to engage is often not there, right? So if you recognize that geopolitics and regulation and all these big global trade breakdowns are going to be a make or break issue for your company, you'd better get serious about empowering the teams and user groups in your business to have the best technology and to make sure they can pay for it, they can implement it, they can have the internal data access, and frankly the organizational access to the right stakeholders in the business. It's in some cases like these people don't talk to each other, right? So you've got to connect the dots inside of your business to elevate this trade compliance team to be able to take advantage of these tools and to solve these problems that now must be solved.
Oh, that was great.
That's outstanding.
I think that's a good way to wrap up the show.
I love that. Folks, I'm going to tell you, this is a show you're going to need to listen to again, but definitely get this to the leadership of your company. And from a leadership perspective, you should have every one of your division heads or department heads listen to this show and listen. And half of it they may not understand, but it will be a case where you can have a great discussion in a staff meeting. Can you imagine having and opening up the concept here of more advanced and going through, man, I'll tell you what, having your products move through the clearance process like grease lightning is something so fantastic, but it takes a lot of work on the front end, not the back end. So I love it. Evan, this has been great. Lalo, I love how you set up these shows. They're wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you, Evan, also for, I know we had originally reached out and it was right in the middle of your planning. Like you said, a couple of weeks ago, you had your summit in DC. So I'm glad that we were able to connect here and maybe even take some of what you learned there and talk about it here in the show. But thank you so much for joining us.
It's always fun. So hopefully we do it again, maybe sooner than 2 years from now.
Yeah, of course. We'll definitely. Yeah. I'll put a calendar reminder so it won't be 2 years. So we'll make it more often. But thank you, Evan. Thanks so much.
It's great to see you both. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right, folks. Have a great day, and we'll look forward to our next show.